What drives someone to expose a devastating truth at their own family reunion? On June 12, 2010, Grace Harrison stood in her Atlanta mansion, meticulously checking every detail for the gathering ahead. The silverware gleamed. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. Her children's laughter echoed from upstairs as they prepared for relatives to arrive. To anyone watching, Grace embodied the ideal of success, a devoted mother, respected socialite, and wife to one of Atlanta's most prominent attorneys. She had spent 15 years building this life, hosting countless dinner parties and charity events, attending her children's recitals, and standing proudly beside her husband David at legal galas. Every morning, she woke up in their $3 million home, went through her carefully curated routine, and maintained the appearance of absolute perfection. But that afternoon, as the summer sun beat down on the mansion's marble floors, Grace's hands trembled as she gripped a single piece of paper. One text message, discovered purely by chance, would transform this family reunion from a celebration into the moment that shattered the Harrison legacy forever. In the next hour, Grace Harrison would make a decision that would send shockwaves through Atlanta's elite social circles, destroy a prestigious law career, and force everyone to question how well they truly knew the people closest to them. Welcome to True Crime Theatre HQ. For more trending true crime like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that when it is released, you don't miss crime stories like this, and don't forget to share them with your friends. The Harrisons weren't just another wealthy family in Atlanta's social scene. They were the family others measured themselves against. David Harrison had built his reputation over 2 decades, transforming himself from a promising young law graduate into one of Georgia's most formidable attorneys. His name carried weight in courtrooms across the state, and his client list read like a who's who of Atlanta's elite. At 42, he'd already secured partner status at his firm, handling cases that made headlines and shaped legal precedents. Grace Harrison understood the power of perception. At 38, she'd mastered the art of being the consummate attorney's wife. She served on 3 charitable boards, organized fundraisers that drew Atlanta's most influential figures, and never appeared in public without projecting an aura of effortless sophistication. Her calendar was a testament to careful curation. Every event, every appearance, every social obligation perfectly timed and executed. Their children seemed destined to carry forward the Harrison legacy. Emily, at 16, had already performed piano at Carnegie Hall, her talent drawing attention from prestigious music schools across the country. Teachers spoke of her dedication, her natural gift for music, and the hours she spent practicing in the family's music room. 12-year-old Alex was following his own path to excellence, his baseball prowess already catching the eye of private school scouts who whispered about collegiate potential. The Harrison home itself told a story of achievement. Situated in one of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhoods, the colonial mansion with its white columns and manicured grounds served as the backdrop for society events that filled the social calendars of Atlanta's upper echelon. Every room had been designed to showcase their success, from the imported marble in the grand foyer to the antique furniture that Grace had personally selected from European dealers. Their social circle consisted of federal judges, hospital board members, and corporate executives. The Harrisons didn't just attend the right events, they hosted them. Their annual Christmas gala had become a marker of social status. An invitation meant you'd arrived in Atlanta society. Their summer garden parties drew coverage in local society pages, and their charity auctions regularly broke fundraising records. To the outside world, David and Grace Harrison had achieved what others only dreamed of: a marriage that balanced professional success with family values, wealth with taste, ambition with warmth. Their photos appeared regularly in Atlanta's society pages. David in perfectly tailored suits, Grace radiating elegance, their children poised and polished beside them. But success at this level demands sacrifice. It requires countless hours of maintenance, careful attention to every detail, and an unwavering commitment to maintaining appearances. The pressure to remain flawless, to never show a crack in the foundation, can strain even the strongest relationships. And as Grace would soon discover, the higher you climb in society, the further you have to fall. The Harrisons had spent 15 years building their reputation in Atlanta. In less than 24 hours, it would all come crashing down. Success leaves traces, receipts, appointments, phone records. But the absence of love leaves different kinds of marks. For Grace Harrison, the changes began so gradually she almost missed them. The first missed dinner was explained away with a client emergency. The second with a court filing deadline. By the third, excuses had become routine. David's schedule grew increasingly unpredictable. Court sessions that had always ended by 6 now stretched past 9. Client meetings materialized on weekends. Emergency consultations interrupted family dinners. His phone, once casually left on kitchen counters or coffee tables, became a constant companion, never more than an arm's length away. Grace noticed the shift in their morning routine first. David, who had always lingered over coffee to discuss their days, now rushed out with travel mug in hand, citing early meetings. Their evening conversations, once filled with shared confidences and plans for the future, dwindled to brief exchanges about children's schedules and social obligations. When they did attend events together, Grace felt the difference. David's hand no longer found the small of her back as they navigated crowded rooms. His eyes scanned over her, never quite meeting her gaze. At charity functions, they worked opposite ends of the room. Not unusual for a power couple, except now they rarely reconnected to share observations or private jokes. The changes manifested in smaller ways too. David's dry cleaning pile grew larger, though his court schedule hadn't increased. His credit card statements showed lunch charges at restaurants closer to his office, replacing their long-standing weekly date at their favorite cafe. His cologne changed, subtly at first, then completely. Grace began tracking these discrepancies almost unconsciously. She found herself noting the time between his text responses, counting the nights he missed bedtime with the children, measuring the growing silence at breakfast. The mental tally became a weight she carried, each new observation adding to her burden of uncertainty. Their children sensed it too. Emily stopped practicing piano when David was home, as if afraid to draw attention. Alex's baseball games, once a mandatory family event, saw David arriving late and distracted, his eyes on his phone more than the field. The family dinner table, once a place of laughter and shared stories, became an exercise in careful conversation. Grace's friends noticed changes in her as well. Her legendary attention to detail in planning events became almost obsessive. She double-checked guest lists, triple-checked menu selections, scrutinized every aspect of their public appearances with increasing intensity. It was as if, by controlling these external details, she could somehow hold together the pieces of her private life that were slowly slipping away. The Harrison house maintained its pristine appearance. Flowers were still arranged perfectly, meals were still served on time, social engagements were still met with unfailing grace. But in quiet moments, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Grace found herself standing in their kitchen, staring at David's empty chair, wondering how much longer she could pretend not to know what these changes meant. She had built her life on the foundation of her marriage to David. Now, as that foundation showed its first cracks, Grace faced a choice. She could either close her eyes and maintain the facade, or she could look closer at the evidence mounting before her. The truth, she would soon discover, had been hiding in plain sight all along. It's remarkable how 15 years of marriage can unravel in the span of 30 seconds. For Grace Harrison, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while organizing files in David's home office. The envelope wasn't sealed, wasn't hidden, just lying there among legal briefs and court documents. Inside was a single printed page, a text message conversation that would shatter every certainty in Grace's carefully constructed world. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you." The message was from someone named Samantha. The timestamp showed 2:43 p.m. that same day. Grace read it once, twice, 3 times, each time hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something innocent, something explainable. They didn't. As Grace stood there, holding that single piece of paper, memories began clicking into place, like tumblers in a lock. Samantha, the new associate at David's firm. The one he'd mentioned in passing at dinner parties. The one who always seemed to be working late on the same cases as David. The one Grace had seen at the last firm gathering, watching David with eyes that lingered too long. The discovery set off a chain reaction in Grace's mind. Every late night at the office, every missed family dinner, every unexplained credit card charge, they all suddenly made perfect sense. The evidence had been there all along, scattered like breadcrumbs through their daily lives. Grace had simply refused to follow the trail to its inevitable conclusion. She began to piece together a timeline. Samantha had joined the firm 8 months ago. David's behavior had shifted around the same time. The new cologne, the sudden interest in working weekends, the protective attitude toward his phone. The affair had been playing out right in front of her, hidden behind a veneer of professional collaboration. Grace's investigative instincts, honed by years of managing complex social relationships, kicked in. She began methodically reviewing credit card statements, phone records, calendar entries. Each document added another layer to the betrayal. Dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants she'd never visited. Hotel charges on nights David claimed to be at conferences. Late-night calls that never appeared on their shared phone bill. The most painful discoveries were the smallest ones. A receipt for a women's scarf from a boutique Grace had never entered. A parking ticket from a neighborhood across town where neither of them had any business. A dinner reservation made under just David's name at what had once been their favorite restaurant. As the evidence mounted, Grace felt her anger crystallize into something cold and sharp. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the calculated deception, the careful maintenance of 2 separate lives, the casual cruelty of carrying on as if nothing had changed while their family slowly fell apart. The irony wasn't lost on Grace. She had spent years managing their family's public image, protecting their reputation, ensuring every detail of their lives projected success and stability. Now she would use those same skills to document her husband's betrayal. Each piece of evidence was carefully photographed, every document copied, every detail recorded. In the coming hours, Grace would need to make decisions that would alter the course of not just her life, but the lives of everyone in their social circle. But for now, she sat in David's office, surrounded by the evidence of his infidelity, and waited. He would be home soon, walking through their front door with the same confident stride, the same casual greeting, the same practiced lies. Only this time, Grace would be ready. The confrontation that would destroy the Harrison family's perfect facade was about to begin. 7:32 p.m. David Harrison's key turned in the front door of the mansion, the sound echoing through the unusually quiet house. Grace had sent the children to their grandmother's, ensuring no witnesses to what was about to unfold. She sat in the living room, the gathered evidence arranged on the coffee table before her, each piece laid out with the precision of a prosecutor preparing their case. David's greeting died in his throat when he saw her. Perhaps it was her posture, rigid and unfamiliar, or maybe it was the papers spread before her. For a man who made his living reading courtrooms, the shift in his expression spoke volumes. Recognition, fear, then, quickly masked, calculation. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man used to diffusing tense situations. Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she lifted the printed text message, the catalyst that had started it all, and held it up in the fading evening light. The next 4 minutes became a masterclass in denial. David dismissed the message as a misunderstanding, claimed Samantha was just an eager associate, suggested Grace was overreacting. His words came smoothly, rehearsed, as if he'd practiced this moment in his mind. But Grace wasn't finished. One by one, she laid out her evidence. The hotel receipts, the credit card statements, the phone records. Each piece of paper represented another crack in David's carefully constructed, alternate life. She'd even compiled a timeline, plotting out every unexplained absence, every suspicious charge, every late night at the office. David's denials began to falter. His explanations grew less confident, less coherent. The skilled attorney, used to controlling every conversation, found himself cornered by his own paper trail. When Grace produced photographs of him and Samantha entering a hotel across town, his facade finally cracked. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice dropping its professional polish. "It's just, it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." Each word designed to minimize, to deflect, to reduce 8 months of calculated deception into something trivial. Grace listened as David attempted to rewrite their history. He spoke of pressure at work, of feeling unappreciated, of how Samantha had pursued him. He promised it was over, that it had never been serious, that Grace was the one he truly loved. The words washed over her like empty static. "How long?" Grace's question cut through his explanations. "How long have you been lying to my face?" David's answer, that it had started as innocent flirtation at office parties, developed into lunch meetings, then late-night encounters, came out in fragments. Each admission seemed to physically pain him, not from guilt, but from the humiliation of being caught. The breaking point came when David suggested they could move past this, that with time and perhaps counseling, they could return to normal. As if normal meant anything anymore. As if their life together hadn't been built on a foundation of lies. Grace stood, her movements deliberate, controlled. "Normal?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Was it normal when you were with her the night of Emily's piano recital? Was it normal when you missed Alex's championship game because you were in a hotel room across town?" The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, the magnitude of David's betrayal hung between them like a physical presence. He had not only betrayed their marriage, he had sacrificed their children's memories for stolen moments with Samantha. Grace had planned this confrontation meticulously, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw reality of watching 15 years of trust disintegrate in a single evening. As David moved toward her, perhaps to comfort her or to attempt more explanations, she raised her hand to stop him. "Don't," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare try to touch me. I'm not the woman you need to comfort right now. Why don't you call Samantha? I'm sure she's wondering why you're late." Word travels fast in Atlanta's elite circles. By the time the sun rose the next morning, phones across the city lit up with messages. The Harrison scandal spread through country club whispers, hurried conversations in corporate elevators, and urgent calls between law firm partners. A family's carefully constructed reputation, 15 years in the making, crumbled in less than 24 hours. For David Harrison, the professional consequences were immediate and severe. His law firm, which had once proudly displayed his name on their website's homepage, quietly moved him to the second page of their partner listings. Clients began requesting different attorneys for their cases. Court appearances that had once commanded respect now drew whispers and sideways glances. The morning after the confrontation, David arrived at his office to find his senior partners waiting. The meeting was brief. They spoke of image, reputation, and the firm's values. By noon, David Harrison, once the golden boy of Atlanta's legal scene, was placed on indefinite leave. His corner office, with its view of the city skyline, was quietly packed up by junior associates. Grace's social circle fractured along fault lines of loyalty. Women who had once competed for invitations to her dinner parties now avoided eye contact at charity functions. The same people who had praised her perfect marriage now dissected every interaction they'd witnessed between David and Samantha, retroactively spotting signs they claimed were obvious all along. Emily and Alex faced their own battles at school. Emily stopped performing at recitals, unable to bear the weight of knowing her father had missed her biggest performance for a rendezvous with Samantha. Alex's baseball teammates fell silent when he entered the locker room, their parents' gossip having trickled down to their children. The Harrison mansion, once the crown jewel of their social status, became a symbol of scandal. The same rooms that had hosted Atlanta's elite now felt cavernous and empty. Grace found herself wandering these spaces at night, touching photographs on the walls, each one a reminder of moments she now questioned. But as David's world contracted, Grace's began to expand. She filed for divorce with the same precision she had once applied to planning charity galas. Her attorney, a woman who had once been a guest at her dinner parties, helped her document every aspect of David's betrayal. The same social skills that had made Grace the perfect attorney's wife now served her in building a network of support. The financial unraveling was equally swift. Corporate board positions that had padded David's income disappeared. Speaking engagements were cancelled. The wealth they had accumulated, which had seemed so solid, began to show its fragility. Grace discovered accounts she hadn't known existed, debts hidden beneath layers of financial manipulation. David's affair with Samantha ended as quickly as his career. She resigned from the firm the same week the scandal broke, her own professional aspirations tainted by association. The woman who had helped destroy the Harrison marriage disappeared from Atlanta's social scene, leaving David to face the consequences alone. In the midst of this collapse, Grace found an unexpected strength. The same woman who had spent years maintaining a perfect facade now spoke openly about betrayal and renewal. She began therapy, not to save her marriage, but to save herself. The carefully curated social media posts about family perfection were replaced by honest reflections on starting over. The unraveling of the Harrison family became a cautionary tale in Atlanta's social circles. But for Grace, it became something else, a liberation. Each piece of her former life that fell away revealed a truth she had long ignored, that perfection is often the prettiest prison of all. Power, once lost, can transform even the most controlled individuals. David Harrison's descent from respected attorney to social pariah triggered a psychological spiral that no one could have predicted. The man who had once commanded courtrooms with measured authority began to crack under the weight of his collapsed reality. It started with phone calls, dozens of them. Late-night messages left on Grace's voicemail, alternating between desperate pleas for reconciliation and bitter accusations. His voice, once so measured and precise, became ragged with emotion. The calls came at all hours, each one more erratic than the last. Grace documented everything. Each message, each unexpected appearance, each confrontation was carefully recorded and dated. The same meticulous attention to detail that had once maintained their social calendar now created a paper trail of David's increasing instability. The incident that finally shattered any remnants of the Harrison facade occurred on a Thursday evening. David arrived at the mansion unannounced, demanding to speak with Grace. His appearance shocked their regular security guard. Gone was the polished attorney in tailored suits, replaced by a man whose disheveled state spoke of days without sleep. Grace was hosting a small dinner party, her first since filing for divorce. The guests, mostly women who had stood by her through the scandal, watched in horror as David pounded on the front door, his voice echoing through the marble foyer. When Grace refused to let him in, he began shouting details of their private life, airing their marital grievances for the entire neighborhood to hear. One of Grace's guests, the wife of a local judge, called 911. The police arrived to find David attempting to enter through a side door, still shouting about his rights to the property. The responding officers would later report that the former attorney, a man who had once argued cases before the state Supreme Court, was barely coherent. The sight of David Harrison being escorted from his former home in handcuffs traveled through Atlanta's social circles with the speed of a thunderclap. Phone cameras captured his resistance, his accusations, his final breakdown as officers attempted to calm him. The footage, though never officially released, was whispered about in country club lounges and charity event planning meetings. Grace didn't press charges, but she did file for an emergency protective order. The hearing was closed to the public, but court employees spoke of David's appearance, how the man who had once dominated that same courthouse now sat slumped and defeated as Grace's attorney presented evidence of his escalating behavior. The protective order was granted. David was barred from coming within 500 feet of Grace, the children, or the Harrison mansion. The same legal system he had navigated so skillfully for decades now turned its machinery against him. His own former colleagues refused to represent him, forcing him to hire counsel from a neighboring county. The children, who had been staying with Grace's sister during David's meltdown, struggled to reconcile this new version of their father with the man they had known. Emily stopped reading news articles about the family. Alex refused to attend therapy sessions where he might have to discuss that night. For Grace, watching David's public unraveling brought no satisfaction. The man being led away in handcuffs was a stranger, someone she had never truly known despite 15 years of marriage. As she stood in her doorway that night, watching police lights reflect off the mansion's windows, she realized that the facade she had worked so hard to maintain had been protecting a reality she herself hadn't fully understood. The Harrison family's final public appearance together would be in court at a hearing that formally ended their marriage. David, now medicated and under his lawyer's strict supervision, sat silently as the judge dissolved the union. Grace, straight-backed and composed, spoke only when required. Their children were absent, having chosen to spend that day at school rather than witness the official end of their family's illusion. Time has a way of revealing truth in layers. 3 years after the Harrison scandal shook Atlanta's elite circles, the aftermath continues to ripple through lives forever altered by one family's collapse. Grace Harrison no longer lives in the mansion that once symbolized her perfect life. She sold it 6 months after the divorce, using the proceeds to purchase a smaller home closer to her children's schools. The rooms there aren't filled with antiques or carefully curated artwork. Instead, they hold something more valuable: genuine laughter, honest conversations, and the kind of peace that comes from no longer having to maintain appearances. She started a foundation supporting women rebuilding their lives after divorce. The same social connections she once used to climb Atlanta's social ladder now serve a different purpose: creating networks of support for women facing similar journeys. Her charity galas these days raise money for domestic violence shelters and children's counseling services. Emily, now in college, returned to performing. Her music changed. Deeper, more complex compositions that speak of loss and renewal. Alex found his voice on the baseball field, his father's absence transforming from a wound into fuel for his determination. The children visit David on scheduled days, their relationships slowly rebuilding on a foundation of difficult truths rather than comfortable lies. David Harrison's path took a different turn. After completing court-mandated therapy, he opened a small legal practice in a neighboring county. His name no longer appears in society pages or legal journals. The few clients who seek him out find a changed man, humbled, slower to judge, carrying the weight of his choices in every careful word. Samantha, the woman who helped trigger the Harrison family's collapse, left Atlanta entirely. Last reports placed her at a law firm in Seattle, where the name Harrison carries no particular weight. Her role in the scandal follows her online, a digital shadow she cannot entirely escape. The Harrison story became a whispered warning in Atlanta's social circles. At charity events and country club gatherings, conversations still turn to that summer night when perfect appearances shattered against hard truth. Some see it as a cautionary tale about infidelity. Others view it as a lesson about the price of pride. But those who look deeper recognize something more profound, a story about the courage to face truth, no matter the cost. The collapse of the Harrison marriage forced Atlanta's elite to examine their own carefully maintained facades. How many other perfect families were holding similar secrets? How many other marriages were built on foundations of careful lies and passive acceptance? The questions linger, uncomfortable reminders that appearance and reality rarely align perfectly. Grace Harrison's final public statement about her marriage came during a charity event she organized for domestic abuse survivors. Speaking to a room full of women who had faced their own battles, she said simply, "Sometimes losing everything is the price of finding yourself." Today, the Harrison name no longer commands the respect it once did in Atlanta's social circles. But perhaps that's the final lesson of their story, that respect built on illusion was never really respect at all. The true measure of character lies not in maintaining perfect appearances, but in how we face the moments when those appearances fall away. In the end, the Harrison family saga wasn't just about a marriage destroyed by betrayal. It was about the courage to shatter a beautiful lie in pursuit of an ugly truth. It was about the strength required to rebuild from ruins. And most importantly, it was about the price we pay for perfection and the freedom that comes from finally letting it go. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss crime stories like this, and don't forget to share them with your friends.